You can use AI to build full wireframes with a single prompt. And at first, it probably looks really impressive. But then you notice what it forgot, what it misunderstood, and what you now really have to fix. Let's look at where AI actually helps in the wireframing process and layouts as we start discussing stupid. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. We got another great episode for you today. Today, joining us is Chad and Cole, of course. And Cole, as I seem to do every time, and people are probably getting real sick of this, that I do the same thing every time, but I'm going to turn it over to you and you can introduce the topic we're going to be talking about today.
I don't think people are sick of it if they're still listening to the podcast, then, dude,
No, that's true.
right.
That's true.
Anyway,
People are listening because they must be what? Subscribing and liking and following.
turning on those notifications. Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's
all that
that's
good
very
stuff.
true.
Anyways, well, yeah, today's episode is a bit different than the other episodes we've done so far in this series. It's mostly revolved around, uh, you know, content creation, content research, more along like the actual content side of things. But today we are talking about how AI can assist you or uh, not assist you very well in wireframing and layout. So, yeah, Virgil, I'll turn over to you real quick. So, how
So
would
you're
you
throwing it
describe
back to
people?
me. Okay. Yep.
Ding
Well,
dong again.
it's part of the content process. I mean, if you're building a piece of content, I mean, it doesn't just stop with that content. Now, it may be different people in your organization that do these different things, but it's still part of, the entire content life cycle is getting it out there in a published stage, which means, yeah, you need to have a layout, you need to have a design, you need to optimize it for search. You got to do all these kind of things like that. And that's really kind of where we wanted to explore stuff. And we brought in Chad because Chad, you do this stuff every once in a while.
It is part of my job, yes. It's, I'd say a significant portion.
A significant portion. And wireframing and layout is always kind of one of those really good but very difficult pieces because for a lot of people, especially on the business side, it's kind of a mental leap to be able to go there and to do wireframing well because wireframes in general should be boxes and squares. I mean, that's really what it should be, and it's about structure. It's about where things sit on a page. It's where um, uh, the different kind of content structure you'd use and all that kind of stuff without bringing a design in it because we all know that design should really support that function. So the wireframes are really the functional piece of it and bring it in. And so it was interesting. I just thought it would be a fun exercise to see because obviously we use Figma, which has its own AI piece that's really big around being able to help you create wireframes and prototypes and all that kind of stuff. But that's kind of advertised. I mean, the development side of AI engines is very much a very well documented. I think one of the areas that they actually do better at than some of the more freeform content stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much development code out there and structure that it's easy to bring that in for AI to understand that and generate out some stuff. You still have to know what you're looking at, just like anything else. But um, and
But
this,
there's rules,
yes, there's rules. There's logic behind it, and that's easy for a computer to understand and spit out.
and so that's cool.
Yeah.
So I with this one, I actually decided to do something a little bit different with that, and that was kind of fun. And Cole and I have had some good laughs about how far you could take this back. But one of the things that I've seen, and I actually went through this process around uh, doing some strategic planning at High Monkey, and I actually a friend of mine had told me about how I could use AI to kind of create prompts that could walk me through a guided situation to kind of come up with some of this stuff. And obviously, you guys have seen some of the stuff that came out of that. So I decided to do the same. I mean, I've been kind of told here that that is something you could do. So I actually instead of creating a prompt to create a wireframe, I created a prompt to create the prompt, create the wireframe in that. So we probably could have taken it and I could have created a prompt to tell me how to create the prompt, create the prompt for the wireframe to create the wireframe in that.
Pretty sure this
You know,
is
I
how
think this is
AI
kind of a. Oh, sorry.
I was pretty sure this is how AI becomes sentient in the first place.
Right, exactly. Uh,
I think this is kind of a good approach because I think AI's feelings gets hurt when it's asked like a simple question, asked to do a lot, but you kind of were like, hey, like what do you want to be asked when ask you to make this thing? So
yeah, I mean it is because you know, and it's kind of like wireframing or design or anything. I mean, one of the things that is always the struggle is kind of figuring out how to start. And so it's one of the things I don't use AI a lot outside of what we're doing for the podcast, but I'm using it a little bit more to help me kind of get those creative juices going and kind of get started with stuff. And so with a prompt, it's like, well, really, what information do you need if I want you to build me a wireframe? What do you really need from me to be able to do that?
right.
And obviously, I did that, and it created not a prompt; it created a prompt. It was like 4 pages long. But one of the really cool parts about it was is it created a prompt where it told me like, yeah, I had said that I wanted a prompt that basically kind of created a wireframe around this article that I was attaching, and called out things, looked for things, and kind of used style around it. And it really took a lot out of it, where it showed how you could configure call outs, definitions for glossary type terms, and different things like that, highlighted things, highlighted quotes, all that kind of stuff. And it gave me very much a structure. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, I really want to see that structure, go to the episode on discussingstupid.com and you can download the prompt and actually see what it did and how we got that prompt and
Uh-huh.
all that there. But it was really, as far as this entire process, this was 100% successful, because I mean, it gave you basically fill in the blanks in a Word document, where then I went and, I said what the title is, here's the abstract, here's the content, here's the color scheme I want you to use, here's the fonts I want you to use, and that kind of stuff. I mean, it went down a rabbit hole that would take some people to doing it. But the really cool thing is that from a basic level, when we used that and took it into actually having the different tools tested out, it worked really well.
Yeah.
Like, it gives you something to react to instead of having to make up in the first place. It's hard to react to your own work when you pour so much into it,
Right.
top to bottom. But
Your
it's
brain's already shot at that point.
yeah, and you've stared at the same thing, you've poured over it, you've moved this box here and there. So once you have an initial wireframe that you've generated from scratch, there's little to react to because you've already been staring at it for so long. So having that initial broad strokes uh, kind of layout in front of you generated by AI is something that you can react to and say
Right.
yes, no, so forth.
Yeah. Fill in the blanks, just good. I mean, it kind of gets it there. And the nice thing is it's really a structure you could use over and over. I mean, there is some uniqueness to the blog post, but at the same time, you could use that kind of structure. And it was interesting to see how it structured the document. And I didn't only, so I used Claude, and it's which is Anthropic, and its new Opus model for this. But it actually was able to also, work with the other tools that I used as well. I mean, and they didn't sit there and say, I don't understand this format. So it was a generic format for machine language, I guess, that all of them understood what to do from that. They all did them a little different, but overall they understood it. And that in and of itself uh, is there. And I do love that ability to, uh, to kind of look at how it was, and to be able to look at what's happening there, and read the article, understand the article, give suggestions on how that format would be. So I mean, there's a lot of time saving there. But again, as we've kind of pointed out time and time again, that doesn't stop your role. You still have to play a role. I mean, I still had to fill in the blanks and figure that all out. It still took me 10, 15 minutes to do it, but compared to doing everything else from scratch, I mean, that in and of itself is a huge time saver.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think one of the biggest risks here is like someone who's not as knowledgeable about like wireframing, someone who doesn't know about, the ins and outs of like layout design, stuff like that. They might see what AI gives you in this scenario and be like, oh man, this is awesome. And then like, who knows what happens from there. I mean, I just think that there is kind of a can of worms of risk that is opened up here when you're talking about wireframing with AI. Chad, as someone who is no stranger to wireframing, does this whole topic kind of excite you more, or kind of what I was talking about seem a little bit risky?
It's funny. It's a little bit of both, I think. It's a good tool and it's a good way to start. But I think the underlying thing in my brain to kind of point Cole is it doesn't excuse you from having, some expertise in that area, to fill in blanks, to make adjustments, to make sure best practices are being applied, to make sure that what's being wireframed, is something we've run across a few times, can actually be developed within
Exactly.
within uh, your uh, within your timeline and your budget. So it's a great tool, but at the same time, if somebody just took a prompt, generated the wireframes, and then took it to their department, said, build this exactly how it is, um, that might lead to kind of a whole can of worms. So
Yeah, I mean, it's the 80-20 rule, and all of a sudden I'm sitting here listening to you going, "My God, am I becoming like the AI cheerleader here all of a sudden?" And I'm like, "There." But here's another thing to your point, Cole, and I think it's a great point, is that I kind of know what I'm doing in that, and I also had article, the blog post that we created, and I said, "Do it based off this." So it was looking at that, and then it was pulling information from it. Let's say you were starting from scratch, how you could do it. Well, that's one of the things, kind of going back to why I brought up that example of doing some strategic planning with this, is instead of like giving it instructions, I said, basically, I want to do this. What questions can you ask me to help me get there? And that is one thing that I had never really thought of using AI for myself, that people have shown me. But we also know the negative side of that in the world, that, people are having conversations with them in AI or taking them down paths. So you still have to
Yeah.
have some knowledge. But, for this, you could literally say, I want your help creating a wireframe. What's information I can give you to get started? Because the important thing about the prompt itself is that it was nothing about how many boxes or squares you wanted it, where do you want things placed on the page, all that kind of stuff. There was no questions like that. It kind of, made some assumptions on that, what you wanted. But overall, uh, I think it's that if it can get you 60% of the way started, especially if you're somebody who just isn't that comfortable with it, it's a great start.
So do you think that the next step up when it comes to prompting here in this instance would be like adding in like constraints to the prompt? So well, let's say like, accessibility, keeping that 4:5 to 1 contrast ratio. Um, and then maybe you have specific spacing requirements, like putting these types of things in the wireframe that, you might not think to add off the first jump.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they do this kind of stuff, they're going to do it once and they're going to do it again. They're going to do it again because they're going to kind of learn from it. And one of the things I like to do a lot of times is I'll sit there and I'll ask a prompt, and then when I don't quite get what I want, instead of writing a whole new prompt, I just say, using the information you just provided me in the last prompt, constrain this by this, do this with it, change it like this, exclude this stuff like that. So you're basically using, like multiple, like, I'm doing schemas for our website, and that has been happening constantly, from that side, that uh, uh, I'm like, okay, based off what you just did here, also do it for these pages in there. So
Yeah. Well, I think it would be a good time now to look into how each of the tools perform and give our thoughts on them. What do you guys think?
yeah, no, I agree. So for here, I use 3 different tools. I wanted to use Claude again because obviously it created the prompt. So I also wanted to see not only how Claude did it, but also how it responded to its own prompt, and then also how how other tools did as well. Claude did a really good job from a layout, and again, everybody will be able to download and view the wireframes themselves from our website at discussingstupid.com, so you can go there and that. It by far, I think you and I both agree, Cole, had the best layout in the way that it laid out the page. Just the way it did call outs, the way it did the glossary definitions as kind of, collapsible panels and that kind of stuff. It did a lot of great things. It added a sticky menu at the top. Its structure was very solid. You could see where it wasn't ideal. You could see from a layout standpoint, actually just plugging this in and using it, and it'd be quite a good design from that side. One of the things that I liked, and this was actually something that the prompt created, was that you had we asked for a desktop wireframe, a mobile wireframe, and then a list of the components that we wanted in there. And you could easily switch from that on there. And it also had a little call out down at the bottom where you could look at all the settings that it did and that kind of stuff. So there were some really great things. So overall, it did a great job from that side. Now, there were some things that it failed miserably, and some of them are ultimately ironic. And they weren't the only one. They all failed miserably at this. The first one being accessibility. So one of the things we had is in the prompt, we had information about the things that it needed to do from an accessibility standpoint, including color contrast. We know that our own color scheme for our website, which is the colors that we used, we know the color combinations that work and the color combinations didn't. It failed miserably. I would say 60% of it is non-accessible. And we even gave it, it needs to be a 4 to 5 to 1 ratio minimum. And it didn't test that at all. It was very obvious from there. There were a lot of examples of the images that it used. It kind of just used a lot of random images. I mean, they all kind of did this. And again, it's a wireframe, but we did ask it to create an image based off of stuff. Claude was really the only one that actually tried to create an image that was relatively related to the thing. So that was there. But it wasn't really that impressive. But the most interesting thing beside that was, and Claude did this and Google Gemini did this, is it removed most of the text from the article. I mean, it used about 50% of the text in the article and just got rid of the rest. And I had the full text of the article in there, and it was so weird why it did that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see what it like prioritizes and what it doesn't. And apparently the content of our article wasn't important enough for this wireframe. So,
well, and another piece there that is kind of challenging from using something like that is that it exported it as React JavaScript, and then I had it converted to HTML. But the reality is, from the standpoint of somebody, unless you have a good front end dev or somebody, they're just not going to be able to work with it. The other thing is it's using all inline styles. It does a lot of things there. So from the standpoint of creating the wireframe, it did a pretty good job. From the standpoint of using a wireframe that you could do something with, it didn't do a very good job at all. I mean, it would basically, it'd lock you into needing somebody with a lot of experience and understanding of how to do this stuff to be able to make it work.
Yeah, and your experience with Gemini was fairly similar, right?
Gemini was very much so. I use Gemini. They just released Gemini 3, which is Google, their new model, and it worked very well. Kind of a similar thing. what was really weird about it as well is that it even used less text. I mean, I want to say it used about 25% of the text from the article. So it was really short, but overall the look and feel was relatively the same. It had a little bit, where Claude used dark colors, it sometimes used light colors, all that kind of stuff in there. Its callouts were actually the most accessible. They didn't have as many accessibility issues as the other ones, but it also was the simplest wireframe, I think, from that side. But it still failed on accessibility issues. A lot of the images, remember, they had like it had text in it, and then that, but it was just a generic placeholder. It actually didn't create any of the images; it just created placeholders from it, and that. So, but overall, relatively similar in that. And overall, again, it exported as HTML. So again, but it had used a lot of complex styles. It take that thing, and you always have to think about that.
Yeah, but I think so kind of the real magic when it comes to the AI wireframing is with Figma Make, in my opinion, because of how easy it is to put into your workflow, you know,
Right.
because everyone's using Figma to wireframe. And then when you can use that same AI tool to then like be able to make edits on the components that it makes versus just kind of seeing it in like an HTML file, like I think that was
Yeah, I mean Figma make so that's Figma's AI component. Obviously, Figma's entire existence is about creating prototypes and layouts and everything like that. And it did a great job. I mean, I'm gonna still say I liked what Claude produced the best, but obviously Figma Make, you could actually copy it into a Figma design and then use it just like you would any other thing. So you can literally work with the wireframe at that point and all that. And that in and of itself is just a huge thing. So you could think of using Figma Make not only to kind of create an entire wireframe, but just create a component, some type of interactive component that you spend hours trying to make work yourself, and now get it to make it in there. It was the only one to use all the text of the article, so it was literally the entire article in there, which I thought was hilarious. It did a good job with its call outs. One of the things that I liked is that it gave a good description about each of the components underneath, like the constraints and all that kind of stuff for desktop versus mobile. And that I thought that was very handy. It gave a lot of annotations in line in that, which, obviously if you're going to show a customer, you might end up removing, but overall it was really good to kind of understand the things from that. It still failed in the color contrast. It still did all that really badly. Its example images were hilarious. I mean, it used images that had nothing to do with anything. So it basically showed that it has no ability for image creation or anything because, like, it like, what was the one on like the cost of accessibility, and it put two tables sitting side by side.
yeah, those
And it
two
was like,
chairs.
what does that have to do with anything? Um,
Oh my
I
god.
definitely could tell, Chad, that it used Bootstrap
Yep.
because it used a lot of the standard Bootstrap colors
Yep.
in it, and that. So that was there, and it had some repeats of things, like it had related articles in two places, but basically the same thing. It did some things there, but overall, again, that'd probably get you 60% there. You now have an actual model that you can bring into Figma design and you can work with. So for me to update it and kind of make the changes that I needed to would take me a fraction of the time than having to do it from the start. And that probably makes sense. Now, Figma is not the only wireframe tool out there. There's several others that do it as well. But this is obviously the one that we use in our own workflow. So this was the one that we decided to use from that side. So I think in the end, it has some great uses, but it's kind of with the caveats. It could very easily take you down a rabbit hole that you can't get back out of. Um, One of the things I was pleasantly surprised with, and one of the things that when I first made it in Figma Make, is I worried about, was it going to like nest components inside components, and make it kind of messy, almost like Chad and I were talking about from a development side, how you can buy somebody's third party software and spend 4 times as much trying to change it as it is to do it yourself. In that, so um, but overall, it actually did pretty clean structure. So I was impressed by that.
yeah, overall, it seems like a nice, nice tool for like jump starting this process. And I think the excitement for me, anyways, is you can like use more of your brain power to make like smaller edits, and be more specific with your design versus like all that time it takes to make several pages of a wireframe. But
Right.
like with any of these AI tools, that doesn't mean you can just kind of like, all right, AI took care of it. You gotta really think about those constraints that I mentioned earlier. You gotta make sure that you're still adhering to your own design systems. And I think AI can definitely be a tool in that process, but not necessarily like the authority figure.
Yeah. I think one of the things that Figma Make does it is very interesting that I'd like to try at some point is you can reference a design. Um, and it could be interesting because you might create the first one or kind of what you want, and you could ask it to maybe help you improve it. You could ask it to, now that I've created the home page, can you create me all these sub pages and use these parameters for it? I mean, there's some definite time saving thing. And I think that's the thing. I mean, when we ask AI to do kind of original creative stuff, it tends to not do well. And it tends to struggle unless you give it extremely specific examples, and understanding and that kind of stuff. But when you ask it to do logical stuff like, okay, take this and make it into a logical order and suggest things, it seems to do very well from that side. And I think that's very important to understand.
Uh-huh. Well, man, kind of lost my train of thought there, but um, I was gonna say something super important. Oh, shoot.
Well, it's late in the episode, so maybe it's that time to wrap it up. and that
Yeah.
and we'll add yours as a social post later.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. And that. So, well, thanks guys for joining. Great episode. We got some more things, and I think next time after this, we're going to talk about design and
Here we
kind of
are.
bring it from the design standpoint, which again should be a very interesting testing process.
Indeed. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Just a reminder, we'll be dropping new episodes every 2 weeks. And if you enjoyed the discussion today, we would appreciate it if you hit the like button and leave us a review or comment below. And to listen to past episodes or be notified when future episodes are released, visit our website at www.discussingstupid.com and sign up for our email updates. Not only will we share when each new episode drops, but also we'll be including a ton of good content to help you in discussing stupid in your own organization. Of course, you can also follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud, or really any of the other favorite podcast platforms we might use. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.